Hi, this is Mark B. Goodson. I'm a fine art oil painter, and today I'm going to teach you about proper uses or good uses, things that will help you with your palette. Your palette is a working tool. It should work for you while you're being creative. You may have had some frustrations with your palette in the past, or known another artist who's had frustrations with their palette, and I'm going to help you have those frustrations be a thing of the past. Now, often palettes are messy. Some artists just have messy palettes. I can't quite understand why myself, but I'm going to help you past that. So a palette, when it's improperly used, can be like a kitchen that's dirty. It's got piles of dishes and a grimy counter. It's just hard to work there. It's hard to have a pleasant meal, an enjoyable meal in such an environment as that, just as it would be difficult to have a inspiring, creative experience with painting if your palette's in that kind of condition. So we're going to explore ways to help you avoid that and have your palette work for you while you paint. All right, let's get started. So there's quite a few different types of palettes. You're probably familiar with glass palettes, wood palettes, disposable palettes. Here's a wood palette that I've got that is made by New Wave. Lovely palette. It works. This one's cut in a way that contours to your body so your arm doesn't have to hold the weight all the time. And you can mix around with that, get your brush and paint. I don't really paint with this sort of palette all the time because I just don't want to hold it all the time. And you'll learn more about why I don't in the future. But today I'm going to show you the palette of my choice is the disposable palette. So I'm going to show you various ones. They come from just about every brand that makes art supplies. Here's a Winsor Newton palette, and I'm going to show you other ones here in a second. But what's happening here on this palette is I've taken the colors that you see that are out here, and I have created the colors that are in here. Not because I needed these colors for anything particular. I just wanted to really work one spot on this palette with the palette knife, really distress by use the surface as much as you see here, so that you could tell whether or not this surface breaks down. There's some sort of coating, I don't know if it's plastic or what it is, on the paper that creates and becomes one sheet of the pages that are on this palette pad. So you can see that, I'm going to point my palette at it, my palette knife. You can see there that it really started to break down the surface of the palette. So it just didn't just stay smooth and nice like it is out here. I don't mind if it gets a little discolored like what's happening out here, or in here, but to have it actually break down, I don't care for that. So that's a Winsor Newton palette. It held up pretty good, but it's breaking up. And if you go through a whole painting, you're gonna mix more than the amount of time I spent mixing on that one. Here's a Jerry's Artorama palette. This one I use to take the various reds that I have in tubes and try different things with them to see what one I thought would work best for a particular project I was working on at the time. But I did all my mixing down here. You can see where it's distressed the surface a bit and it's breaking up. So that one broke up also. Now here's a Strathmore palette, and when I first got this palette, it peeled pretty bad, really. But this one's been sitting around in my studio for quite a while now, and I was quite surprised and delighted that with the same stress test, that the breaking up of the palette surface is not so bad as it was before. So that's good news. We'll talk about that and why that is here soon. Now here's one from Dick Blick. Now this, you'll be able to see that it broke up more than the others did. And you can take this palette knife and stick it right in underneath the surface between the two layers of material, the paper and the coating. So that's going to just continue to break down and get a bigger and bigger spot that the surface is peeled off. So so my experience with using these palettes is that I started out painting with one. I started painting at age 47. I didn't realize I had any kind of aptitude for painting whatsoever. I was quite surprised to find out that I did, but I'm really happy about it now, of course. But my palette pad, I purchased at Utrecht Art Supplies, and it was fine. I had no issues with it whatsoever. It was just worked great. I didn't know that they peeled. The ones I had didn't peel from Utrecht. So, but at one point, Dick Blick purchased Utrecht, and then they consolidated what products they offered in their stores and online, and they discontinued offering the Utrecht palette pad. So it was no longer available, so I just ordered the Dick Blick pad, and that was fine. But it turned out not to be fine because it peeled, and you can see it's still the one that peels the most. And so I called Dick Blick and I talked to them, and they were sorry to hear that I was having trouble with one of their products, but they were happy to get feedback. And the gal there was had some information, was happy to share it with me that the Canson company who makes this pad here, see Canson right there, they are the ones that were making the Utrecht pad, just labeled it Utrecht. And they gave me the contact information for Canson, which I was delighted to get. So I called Canson and ordered a bunch of their pads. I had a stack of them, and everything was going to be good again. See, so I started using a Canson pad, and it peels terribly. It was just like the Dick Blick almost, you know. It was just not what it had been when they were making them for Utrecht. So presuming that they changed their formula for what they put on the paper part of each of these pads, or each sheet, and anyway, it just wasn't as good a quality. So I contacted them again and went the rounds with them. It was very pleasant. They were very pleasant. They showed me that on the back of these, you can see right here, there's a lot number for when this particular pad was made, and the lot when this group was made, they all got that number on them. And so I looked at the old ones and I found different numbers, and I let them know what those numbers were. And I presumed that they would maybe be able to tell that they changed their formula for the production of their pads from the earlier time to now where they're peeling. And they certainly didn't want to have pads that were peeling. So anyway, it turns out that the employees that they had were not there anymore, or no one there knew of anything that they had changed or what they could do about it. So as a consolation prize, they just sent me more pads. And so I got more pads that peel, things that I didn't really enjoy using. So I just filed them away, put them on a shelf in the storage room, and over time, apparently a year or so, 2 years, maybe even now, maybe more, I've run out of the ones that were really working well, or getting close to running out of them. And so I start pulling out these new pads, and lo and behold, they don't peel. And so this is not a scientific test, but I've come to the conclusion that they apparently are curing, and the two surfaces, the paper and this whatever coating they put on the top of it, are bonding better over time. So I'm happy with the pads. I like Canson again. Here we go. And if you'll notice with this one, and this is the same thing is true with the Dick Blick, but the color of white that this pad is versus the creamier tone of this pad, I'm noticing that the ones that go creamy are the ones that are curing and not peeling, whereas the ones that stay whiter in the brightness of their whiteness are the ones that seem to still peel. So a little information there for you. So when it comes to using these pads, here's my standard palette. Well, I've got more on it than what's standard, but I buy the 16 by 12 inch pad, and it fits in this 16 by 12 inch box, which is made by a company called Masterson. And the lid just fits on, I'm sure, well, you might have seen these, you might have not, but they just snap on like Tupperware containers, and you just peel them off. And when I was first buying these boxes, they would come with the paper on the inside that indicated you should not put them in the freezer. And I presume that was because if you take them out of the freezer, then they're brittle, and if you try to pull the lid off, it may break. And in fact, this one has at least 3 broken corners. If you look closer, you can see that this lip is busted off of there, and it's coming off of this corner, and it's busted off partly here. This one's a little bit fractured. Now I've got quite a few of these boxes, and most of them don't have these busted issues, because I decided I got smart enough to let the box thaw out after I take it out of the freezer, let it sit for a half hour while I'm fussing around getting something else ready to paint. And so I don't have the broken lid problem with the other ones. However, it doesn't really matter to me, because once I put this lid on and put it in the freezer, even though the corners aren't completely sealed, still the paint gets cold, and that slows down the dry time. So, I mean, browns are going to dry faster than anything, and everything will still dry a little bit while it's cold in the freezer, but it slows it down a lot. There are those who will take a cotton ball or a piece of cloth or something and put a little clove oil on that fabric and set it inside their palette, so when they store it, even in the freezer, and apparently that has some sort of chemical reaction that retards the dry time, so it slows the paint down from drying, so it stays moist, which makes it more ready for you the next time you go to paint. I haven't tried that yet. I'm not opposed to it. I don't mind learning new things. I just haven't gotten around to trying that, so I haven't done it. So on my standard palette, I've got a few extra colors mixing in here, but typically on my palette, what I like to do is always put my paint in the same place every time, my standard colors that are around the margin. They're not in my mixing area. I don't just squirt them willy-nilly any old place. Then you start getting one of those messy palettes, the dirty kitchen scenario. But rather, my blue is always over here. Could have been green. I could have had blue here and green here, but I started out putting blue here, and I'm used to it, and it works fine. But it might make sense for someone else that's starting out to put their green over here, because that's more in keeping with the color spectrum of having it go to yellow and orange and red, and then the browns, and then the greens, or then the blues would be over there, and then it circles back around to the greens. But I've got a habit, I know where it's at, so I'm just going to stay with it the way I have it. So these 2 colors are out of order, but I know where they are. And that's the important thing, is to know where your paints are and that they're ready to use. All right, so when I mix up my palette, I often will have an extra pad. It's nice to have a bunch of these, because when you're done with the painting, you can transfer your colors onto another pad and then tear that top sheet off and move it away, and then this new pad that you're going to do your new painting in goes in the box and you're set. But at this point, when I'm first setting up my palette, I will, instead of squirting paint onto this palette and getting my paint to the consistency that I like, I will do it over here. And here's a product that I like to use. I don't know if that'll come into focus with my face here, so I'll hide my face. But it's Grumbacher Sun Thickened Linseed Oil. Any linseed oil will be fine in oil paint. But I like this Sun Thickened. It's just a little, it's not as thick as honey. Well, it depends on how warm your honey is. But it's nice because instead of the linseed oil just going off so fast from your palette knife like gasoline would, I shouldn't be playing with gasoline, but this one will let me get a whole drop or more off there, and then I can control it, and I can control just how much I think needs to go into that paint at that time, whether it's more or less. And so I like this product. It comes in this little bottle. I buy it from Dick Blick, and they don't sponsor me either, but neither does the Pallet Box people, Masterson. But they apparently get this in cases that have little boxes that have 4 in each. And so when I found that out, I just buy 2 of those little boxes. So I end up with 8 little bottles of these, and they last me for a while, and I've got them on hand. It's kind of handy. Don't run out when you're wanting to paint and run out of linseed oil. So it's my practice that, like, say if I'm gonna put some raw umber onto my palette, and I squirt out some raw umber here. Raw umber dries quickly. And it's thicker, so I'll put some linseed oil in it and get it to the consistency that I like, kind of a soft, buttery consistency. And then I'll transfer that into my standard palette in the palette box. Sometimes I'll just add more there and stir the oil in there. That's fine. You know, just whatever works for you. But the point is that I will make sure that all my paints on my standard colors are mixed with sufficient amount of oil that they're all at the same consistency. So I don't ever add linseed oil to purple. Purple is, well, it'd be rare. It'd have to really sat there a long time to get dry before I would add oil to it, because it's kind of a translucent paint, but it's also very liquidy. It doesn't thicken up, it doesn't dry fast. I did an entire painting of a portrait of a local college president, commissioned the official portrait of him, and he had these beautiful purple robes, and I got it all painted, and I couldn't deliver it. 2 weeks later, it was still as wet as when I painted it. So I ended up removing the paint and repainting it, but adding a little drying agent to it. So, like, I've got students that have gotten the habit of using Liquin. And I don't have anything wrong with, I don't have a problem with Liquin. Liquin's a fine product. It just should be used properly. And this is a drying oil. Linseed oil is a drying oil, and Liquin is. And it's got a little more drying agent in it, so that if you're wanting your paint to dry more quickly, you can put Liquin in it. Or walnut oil typically is like that, like Liquin, very similar. And you can get your paint to dry faster if you choose it to dry faster. I don't typically need my paint to dry faster than it is already. However, sometimes I'll put a little drop of Japan Dryer, which you can get at Home Depot, and a quart can last you the rest of your life. But a little bit goes a long way at heating up that paint, and so it will dry faster. And I used a little bit of that when I was repainting the purple robes on that college president. And then it dried up just like standard time, and I was able to deliver the painting. They're happy with it. It's in their administration building. Everything worked out good. I just had to paint the painting twice, at least the purple parts. Anyway, so I like consistency of paint on my palette. Now, when I'm getting ready for a painting, or I'm like, I've got my standard colors on here, but I know I'm going to be using, say, these colors on my painting as well, then what I'll do is I'll mix up colors that are the same general color. They might have variations to keep it interesting, but I will put them on my palette in a range of values, just like the blues and these more alizarin crimson sort of red colors, and so that I can have a lot of my mixing done, so that when I actually get into doing the painting, I pretty much got things where I want them, though it's always going to be the case where you're going to take some of this and some of that and mix it together a little bit, and other tones in there, and that makes painting really fun and interesting and art more beautiful. So it just ends up nice that if you can mix up some of the paint before you really get into it, it just kind of gives you a start. Now, when I'm done with a painting, well, let's not go there yet. While I'm painting, if I get to the end of a painting session, instead of leaving my palette like this at the end of the day, and it might have been, so I got paint here and I got paint here, and they might be different colors and I mix stuff up, I will take and turn my palette knife so that the bottom of my palette knife is, I'm pushing the bottom of my palette knife into that paint. I don't try to scoop it up like this with the front of the palette knife, because if you're dealing much with very much paint, then it gets up into the top here, the spoon part of your palette knife, and then it's harder to get off, and then it's just messier. So if you just use the bottom of your palette knife and you push that paint into a little pile, then scoop it up, actually turn the palette knife upside down, and you can scrape it up, and then you can collect that paint, put it back into the group it goes in, or if it's a separate color all together down there, then just take that color, get it to where it's all on the bottom of your palette knife like that, and then put it where you think it will go so that you can get to it the next day. It doesn't go right with these red ones, it doesn't go right with these blue ones, so I might stick it over there. And now I've got a nice little palette, or pile of paint. And then this one's a little bit different, so I can pile that up on the bottom of my palette knife and then push it onto the palette like that. So now those two are cleaned up. Now I've got one more that's a different enough color. I don't want to mess with it until I've cleaned off my palette knife. So here I go, I pick this up, and then I can tuck it right up there in a nice little pile. Excuse me. So then after you've got the mixed colors cleaned up at the end of your painting session, you take a little bit of palette paper towel and a little bit of mineral spirits. I use odorless mineral spirits, have little cups there. And then, here, let me show you what I'm doing here. And I take that paper towel and that it's a little bit wet with mineral spirits, and I clean that mixing area up so that tomorrow or the next time I go to paint, that area is all cleaned up. Now, if I don't do this, the next day, this paint, and even worse, if I hadn't piled it up with my palette knife and just left it a little thicker there, then that's going to be drying up and become kind of like a chuck hole in the middle of your road. If that's one of the reasons I don't like those peeling areas in the palette pad, is they're like having to work around a chuck hole. You don't like to drive along the road going home or going to work or wherever you're going. You don't like chuck holes. And so I like a palette that doesn't peel, and I like a clean surface to paint on the next time I go to paint. So it's just like those dishes in your kitchen. You don't just leave them there piled up. You get done with your meal. It was lovely, you got to enjoy it. Now just do a little cleanup, and then the next time you're gonna have dinner or breakfast or whatever meal's next, it's a pleasant experience. Just like painting will be a pleasant experience consistently if you clean up after yourself. And because otherwise, an artist might get to the point where they just either don't want to paint, it's just messy, oh, I don't want to clean that up, or I wish I had cleaned that up when I was at it yesterday. Just quit painting an extra 15 minutes before you would have and get it cleaned up. Because sometimes an artist, see how nice that is? Now I've got all that space I can work in next time I come to paint. That didn't take hardly any time at all. It's worth it. Be nice to your future self. Be kind to your future self. Clean up. Be ready to paint next time. And it'll work well for you. So now, this is all good information. It's so important to me to have my palette work for me like this. But there's more. There is more. What if, imagine this, what if you could just go to the freezer and pull out a palette that's going to work for you? I mean, you let it thaw out a little bit and then you go right to work, even in a variety of situations. So for example, here's my standard palette, works great. And I put it in the freezer when I'm done, or I get it out when I'm ready to paint again. But a standard palette is just one that's typically what I would use. Now, on the other hand, what if I'm going to teach grayscale? Look at that. I've got that one labeled grayscale. So pull that out. What is going to be inside here? Grayscale. Not a lot of paint in here right now, but what was left from the last time. So I'm a little more ready for this coming up session to do either lessons in grayscale or a painting that's just in grayscale. You can do some beautiful work that's just in tones of gray. So there's another wonderful thing to have right there in your freezer. It's ready for you. What about this one here? Look at that. Many colors. Now, what do you suppose that means? So if you're going to be teaching or instructing somebody on colors, then you can have a palette that's got more colors than you normally would have on your palette, and you can list the names of those colors right by the little pile of paint, and then instruct people about the different things you can have happen with various colors that they might not have otherwise used or experimented with. Gives you an opportunity to learn more about more colors and the options that are out there. So that's something right there in your freezer. It's ready for you. Now here's a palette. This is a fairly new one for me because I had somebody give me some Winsor Newton paints to just experiment with. And so this palette has just got, I mean, they didn't give me all the colors that I usually have as a standard palette. Like there's not an actual red, there's alizarin crimson in there. But I play around with them, you know, I see if I like them, and it's been kind of a fun thing to experiment with. And they don't interrupt the rest of my work because they have their own palette. And if I want to play with this some more, I just get this palette out. Now, here's a really nice palette. So when you're done with your painting, you finish a painting, and you know what you're going to paint next. So you can take the colors, your standard colors off your palette, put it onto your next palette pad in their proper place so you know where they're going to be. You always know where your paints are. And then you can take the mixed colors that are in your mixing area that aren't part of your standard palette and move them to what I call a extra color palette. Now you can see there's some variety in there. All kinds of little tones of color, variety that got left over from some painting I was working on. But then when I'm starting a new palette, new painting, I get my standard colors on, and then I come back to, and I've got two of these palettes. You can come back to your extra palette, extra color palette, and glean from here, harvest from here, and that'll save you lots of mixing time because the colors are already mixed. Or there's tones that if you put them together, they likely would get you to where you want to be with something on your new painting. So these are some attributes to working with a painting palette in a way that it will work for you and it will be ready for you. And you can have a variety of them ready for you. Now here's one more. I'm going to show you one more palette. This is one that I used for this painting behind me of this statue that Michelangelo did of the Pietà, where Christ's dead body is laying across her lap. But in this case, I just zoomed in on just Mary's head portion of that statue. And my palette was very limited. I only used raw umber, white, black, some alizarin crimson, and cobalt blue. And I got these various shades that I'm working with from that combination of colors. So I didn't need all my standard colors on here. You can have palettes that are just limited for the purpose that your painting needs, that you're working on. So I mixed a lot of colors, and I'll tell you, this is all done in palette knife. I painted this whole painting with this knife, and every once in a while I used a smaller palette knife to get some detailed areas, but for the most part, it's painted on here, and it goes on a lot thicker when you're doing palette knife. I'm telling you, there's at least 6 times as much paint on that canvas as there would have been if I'd used a brush. But my palette worked for me, and your palette can work for you as well. So I hope you'll pay attention to what you've learned today, and you'll put it into practice so that you can have a pleasurable experience painting while your palette works for you. I wish you all the best of luck and success in your painting. I'll be back with more content that's useful. Now, if you'll please just do the clicking stuff, subscribe and share and make comments, and things will be good. Thank you. Take care.